The world thought it had seen it all when it came to the drama surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Scandals, media frenzies, palace leaks. Yet, just when everyone thought the story had reached its climax, a new revelation emerges. One that threatens to shake the royal world to its very core. Imagine waking up one morning to find that the life you believed to be untouchable, carefully curated for decades, could be shattered by whispers, by truths only now coming to light. That was Harry's reality, and the weight of it was nothing like he could have anticipated. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all begins with the question, how well do we truly know the people we love? How much of someone's life is carefully hidden behind smiles, public appearances, and curated social media? And more importantly, what happens when the world begins to pry open those private doors? Prince Harry had spent years defending his wife, standing by her in the eye of the storm, enduring relentless headlines and invasive scrutiny. But even Harry, born into royalty, steeped in tradition, hardened by public life, was not prepared for the waves that were about to hit. From the moment Meghan stepped into Harry's world, there was fascination. A mixed-race American actress, charismatic and intelligent, captivating the attention of one of the most scrutinized men on the planet. To the public, she was modern, fresh, and daring. To Harry, she was everything he had ever wanted: independent, outspoken, someone unafraid to challenge the constraints of a world defined by rules older than most nations. But fascination, as history has shown, is often a double-edged sword. Even in the early days, whispers began to circulate. The media, a relentless beast hungry for clicks and headlines, painted a picture both intoxicating and ominous. Every photograph, every social engagement, every word she spoke was dissected, judged, and transformed into a story, sometimes factual, sometimes fabricated. Harry, for all his experience and insight, had never been in the position of defending not only himself but another person under such an unyielding public microscope. And yet, he did. But behind the public charm and the smiles, Harry began to sense a complexity in Meghan that the world did not fully comprehend. A past that was layered, nuanced, and, in ways, strategically concealed. Not because she was malicious, not because she was duplicitous, but because every person has chapters they reserve for private reflection, chapters they know could be weaponized against them if exposed. Harry, in love, believed he had seen the true essence of the woman he had chosen to marry. He thought he understood her history, her motivations, her struggles. He was wrong. The revelations that would soon surface were not subtle. They did not creep quietly into the light. They crashed into Harry's life like a storm without warning, bringing with them confusion, doubt, and fear. What had been private was now public. What had been carefully managed was now unraveling. And as the world's eyes turned toward the royal couple, the narrative began to shift, subtly at first, and then with a ferocity that left no room for denial. What makes this story so shocking isn't just the revelation itself. It's the emotional labyrinth it drags Harry and the entire royal family through. Imagine the conflict of loyalty versus duty, love versus tradition. Every decision, every statement, every public appearance is now weighed not only in the court of public opinion, but in the hidden chambers of family scrutiny. Harry's shock was compounded by the realization that the life he had painstakingly built with Meghan was now entangled in complexities he had not foreseen, complexities rooted in truths that had been concealed, intentionally or otherwise. And yet, the media frenzy was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind closed doors, conversations that Harry thought would remain private were now sources of speculation. Friends, advisors, and even distant relatives began to whisper, to question, to speculate. Harry had to navigate a minefield of loyalty, trust, and raw emotion, all while maintaining a public persona of strength and composure. But how long can anyone maintain that facade when every revelation threatens to dismantle everything they hold dear? Consider for a moment the enormity of what it means to discover that someone you love carries parts of their past you could not anticipate. Not merely embarrassing facts, not trivial mistakes, but moments and decisions that fundamentally reshape your understanding of who they are. The emotional shock, the internal questioning, the self-doubt, all of it becomes a weight that presses from every direction. And when the world watches, when millions analyze your reactions, your choices, your silence, the pressure is suffocating. What makes Harry's experience even more compelling and heartrending is the duality of love and loyalty. He loves Meghan, undeniably and fiercely. Yet, he is acutely aware of the ramifications of the truths emerging around her. How do you protect someone you love from public scrutiny while also navigating the consequences of those revelations? How do you remain loyal to both your heart and your sense of responsibility? These are the questions that would haunt Harry in the days, weeks, and months to come. And there is a twist. Something the public cannot yet see, something that would turn this saga from a personal dilemma into a story that captivated the world. As Harry struggled to reconcile his emotions with reality, events unfolded that no one, not even the closest members of his inner circle, could have predicted. The shock wasn't only in discovering new truths, it was in realizing how those truths intersected with power, influence, and the unyielding spotlight of fame. As we explore this story, one question will linger in your mind. How does one reconcile love with revelation? How does Harry confront a past he only thought he understood? And what choices must he make when every option carries consequences? The answers are not simple, nor are they clean. They are messy, emotional, and, at times, unforgiving. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The morning started like any other. Sunlight spilling across the windows of Frogmore Cottage, a quietness that, on the surface, seemed ordinary. But Harry felt it immediately, a tension in the air, a vibration he couldn't quite place. You know that feeling, the one that crawls up your spine before something monumental happens? That was it. And by the time he checked his phone, he knew the world he thought he understood was about to shift forever. It began with a call. Not a casual conversation, but one that carried weight, urgency, and a hint of caution. Harry picked up, already sensing that this wasn't going to be routine. The voice on the other end was hesitant, careful, almost conspiratorial. "You need to know," it began, and in that moment, Harry's heart skipped a beat. He had been through the media storms before, seen tabloid headlines that twisted words and warped truths. But this felt different. This felt personal. Have you ever been hit by a truth so sudden it makes the world feel unsteady? That's exactly what Harry experienced. Every instinct screamed, "Brace yourself." Because what came next wasn't speculation or rumor. It was information that threatened to redefine his understanding of Meghan, the woman he loved more than anyone. For years, Harry had believed he knew her story. The early days in Toronto, the acting career, the charity work, the smile that could light up a room. He remembered thinking, during quiet moments alone with her, that she was a puzzle with pieces that all fit perfectly. But sometimes, the most alluring puzzles hide pieces you never see until the moment they reveal themselves, often at the worst possible time. The voice on the phone delivered a narrative Harry couldn't ignore. Carefully, deliberately, it sketched a picture that was far more complex than he had imagined. Not malicious, but undeniably impactful. Every word weighed heavy. Each pause amplified the tension. Harry, usually quick to respond, found himself silent, listening, absorbing, questioning everything he thought he knew. It wasn't just the content of the revelations, it was the timing. Timing is everything. You can withstand any shock if it comes gradually, in stages. But when life hits you with the truth all at once, it leaves no room for defense, no room for preparation. You are left raw, exposed, and forced to make sense of a reality that no longer aligns with your expectations. And Harry, at that moment, realized he had just stepped into one of those moments. As he hung up, he stared out the window. The garden outside seemed unchanged, almost serene, but the calm was deceiving. Everything had changed. Even the walls around him, familiar and comforting, felt like they were closing in, pressing with the weight of uncertainty. The life he had built, the love he had nurtured, and the trust he had placed in the woman beside him, all were now under scrutiny, in ways he had never imagined. This was more than a private crisis. This was a crossroads. And at that moment, Harry knew there was no turning back. He had to confront it, understand it, and make decisions that would ripple through not only his personal life, but the very institution he was born into. But how do you face a storm when the storm comes from the one person you are supposed to trust most? How do you protect someone you love while grappling with revelations that shake the foundation of that love? To understand the magnitude of what Harry faced, you have to consider the stakes. Public scrutiny is one thing, but internal doubt is another entirely. Imagine trying to defend someone to the world while secretly questioning the very truths that define your relationship. It's a tension that gnaws at you from the inside, a conflict between loyalty and reality, emotion and logic. Harry felt it in every bone, in every heartbeat. As he moved through the day, the phone buzzed again. Messages, notifications, updates from advisors, friends, and people who seemed to know more than he did. Each one layered additional complexity onto the situation. Every fact he confirmed seemed to bring more questions. How much did he know about Meghan's past? How much had he assumed? And what was real versus what the media, or even her own carefully curated public persona, had allowed him to see? One particular message stuck with him. It was brief, almost cryptic. The truth is bigger than you imagine. Be careful who you trust. And with that, Harry's mind raced. Bigger than he imagined. Those 4 words echoed relentlessly. Bigger than he imagined. What could be so enormous, so life-altering, that it would require a warning before he even learned it? By evening, Harry felt the weight of the day pressing down. He walked the gardens, trying to clear his head, trying to separate fact from speculation, reality from fear. But the truth is, when revelations hit this close to home, clarity is hard to come by. Every thought seemed to circle back to the same questions. What does this mean for our family? How do I confront it without causing irreparable damage? And, ultimately, can I even reconcile the woman I love with the truths I am only now discovering? And yet, there was another layer to the shock. Harry realized he wasn't just dealing with personal revelations. These truths had the potential to ripple outward, affecting careers, reputations, and legacies. The British royal family is a machine, precise and unyielding, and when one element shifts unexpectedly, it can send tremors through the entire institution. Harry suddenly felt the pressure not only as a husband and a man, but as a prince, someone whose every action, or inaction, could be analyzed, judged, and broadcast to millions around the world. By the time night fell, Harry was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. He sat alone, replaying conversations, questioning motives, and trying to make sense of it all. Every scenario seemed worse than the last, every possibility more daunting than he could face. And yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, there was a spark of determination. He would get to the bottom of this. He would uncover the full story. But he knew, deep down, that the path forward would not be easy. Because what Harry did not yet know, and could not have anticipated, was that the revelations he had begun to uncover were only the tip of the iceberg. There were layers, complexities, and intricacies that would challenge everything he believed about trust, love, and loyalty. And as the night drew on, he realized that the journey he was about to undertake would not only redefine his relationship with Meghan, but might also redefine him entirely. And just when he thought he might find a moment of peace, a knock came at the door, unexpected, urgent, and completely unanticipated. Harry's heart raced. Who could it be at this hour? Friend? Advisor? Or was it something else entirely? The answer would set the stage for a revelation so shocking, so profound, that Harry knew, in that instant, life as he knew it would never be the same. But what came next would push him to the brink, and force him to confront truths that no one could have foreseen. It's easy to look back and see the warning signs. Hindsight makes everything seem obvious, almost inevitable. But when you're in the moment, living life at the pace Harry did, the subtle shifts are easy to overlook. The quiet messages, the fleeting expressions, the offhand comments, they all blend into the background until, suddenly, they scream in your face. For Harry, some of these whispers had been there all along, but he was too focused on the love, the hope, and the dream of a future he was building with Meghan to notice them fully. Think about it. How often do we miss the signs in our own lives? A text left unanswered, a glance that lingers too long, a story that doesn't quite add up. We tell ourselves it's nothing. We rationalize, we explain away, and we hope that our interpretation is correct. Harry did the same. He wanted to believe, to trust, to see only the light in Meghan. And why wouldn't he? After all, she was his partner, his confidant, the person he had chosen to walk beside him through every storm. But even the brightest light can cast shadows. And those shadows, subtle as they might have seemed at first, had a way of stretching over time. There were moments, small at first, that hinted at a complexity beneath the surface. Late-night calls that left him waiting. Stories about past acquaintances that seemed inconsistent. Moments when Meghan's expressions didn't quite match her words. In isolation, they were almost meaningless, easily dismissible. But put together, they formed a pattern, a tapestry of hints that something was more layered than Harry had realized. It started with the way Meghan spoke about her past. To Harry, she shared carefully curated pieces of her story, enough to feel authentic, enough to reveal vulnerability, but never the full picture. She was candid when it mattered, but selective in a way that was almost strategic. Harry, blinded by love and admiration, didn't question it. He accepted her narrative at face value. He wanted to believe in the truth she presented, the person she showed him, because that was the woman he had fallen for. And yet, the media, relentless and unforgiving, began to push cracks into the facade. Headlines, rumors, and speculation started to surface, painting fragments of a picture that Harry hadn't seen. Every tabloid story was a jab, every rumor a spark. But Harry, seasoned as he was in dealing with media chaos, assumed he could manage it. After all, he had weathered storms before. He knew how to navigate public scrutiny. What he didn't know was that these particular whispers weren't just noise. They were the surface of a deeper, more intricate web, one that threatened to reach into the very foundation of his personal life. Have you ever felt that nagging doubt that refuses to leave you alone? That itch in the back of your mind that tells you something isn't quite right? Harry felt it too, though he didn't admit it, not even to himself. There were moments, fleeting and easy to rationalize, when he questioned what he thought he knew. But the emotional stakes were too high. The love he had for Meghan was not something he was willing to jeopardize by chasing shadows, or so he thought. The first unmistakable sign came during a private event in London, a gathering of friends and advisors meant to celebrate a milestone in their lives. Harry noticed subtle interactions, exchanges of glances that seemed too calculated, conversations that seemed rehearsed. To anyone else, they might have appeared normal. To Harry, at the time, he brushed it off. He assumed he was being overly sensitive. But deep down, a part of him felt the first flicker of doubt. And then there were the inconsistencies in her public statements. Meghan's charm and charisma were undeniable, but occasionally, her accounts of past experiences didn't align with records or stories that others told. Harry didn't confront it immediately. He didn't want to. The implications were too vast, too personal. Questioning her fully would mean opening doors he wasn't ready to face. So he compartmentalized, buried the unease, and carried on with the image of their life as he wanted it to be. Yet the shadows kept lengthening. The whispers became more frequent, more pointed. Friends, colleagues, and distant acquaintances began to hint at pieces of her past that Harry hadn't been aware of. Stories surfaced in conversations he hadn't anticipated, subtle, almost accidental references to experiences that painted a slightly different picture than the one he had been told. He tried to dismiss them, to rationalize them. After all, everyone has a past. Everyone has moments they would rather leave behind. But there was a pattern emerging, one he could no longer ignore. And the tension didn't just affect Harry. It began to ripple through their relationship. He noticed her guardedness, her defensiveness when certain topics came up. There were moments of friction, small disagreements that escalated in intensity, subtle power struggles beneath the surface of their partnership. Harry, ever patient and understanding, tried to navigate it with care, but the strain was undeniable. Even love, no matter how strong, has limits when trust is tested by uncertainty. The media didn't help. In fact, it amplified every doubt, every contradiction, every tiny inconsistency into a narrative that seemed impossible to escape. Every headline, every story, every whisper was a reminder that the world was watching, judging, and interpreting their lives in ways that were sometimes cruel, sometimes exaggerated, and sometimes terrifyingly accurate. Harry realized that the court of public opinion was relentless. No matter how private the revelations, No matter how carefully he tried to manage the narrative, it always had the power to leak, to spread, to become something uncontrollable. By the end of that week, Harry's perception had shifted. The flickers of doubt he had brushed off now demanded attention. The whispers in the shadows were no longer ignorable. They required confrontation, clarity, and understanding. And in that moment, Harry understood that the love he had for Meghan, while real and deep, would be tested in ways he had never imagined. He began asking questions, careful, measured, almost covert inquiries meant to piece together the fragments of truth. But even as he sought answers, he faced obstacles, half-truths, ambiguous explanations, and moments of emotional deflection. It was as if every attempt to illuminate the past only revealed further shadows. And with each step, he felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. The feeling that there was no turning back, that what he discovered next would change everything. And then came the moment that crystallized everything. A phone call, a document, a conversation. Something small, almost insignificant in appearance, but monumental in impact. It was a piece of the puzzle that tied together all the whispers, all the inconsistencies, all the subtle hints Harry had ignored. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There was more to Meghan's past than he had ever imagined, and he had been unprepared to face it. It was one thing to confront media speculation. It was another entirely to confront the reality of what lies beneath it. And Harry, despite his courage, his resilience, and his experience, felt the weight of shock settle into his bones. How do you reconcile love with revelation when the revelation challenges everything you believed? How do you maintain trust when the foundation of your relationship seems suddenly uncertain? And just as he began to process it, just as he thought he might gather his thoughts and plan his next steps, a new piece of information arrived. Unexpected, urgent, and completely unanticipated. It promised to push him even further into a world of uncertainty, testing his limits and challenging his perceptions in ways he could not yet comprehend. But what came next would force Harry to confront not just the past, but a present and future he had never anticipated. And it would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about trust, love, and loyalty. The world is quick to judge. Headlines scream, social media explodes, and public perception forms almost instantaneously. But behind the flashing cameras and viral stories lies a much more intricate mechanism: influence. Harry had always understood this in theory, of course. He'd grown up under constant scrutiny. But he hadn't realized just how powerful the narrative machinery around Meghan could be, or how it would infiltrate even the most private corners of his life. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A headline here, a photograph there, an anonymous source quoted with tantalizing hints about Meghan's past. On the surface, it seemed harmless, mere stories, gossip, tabloid fodder. But each fragment carried weight, each snippet subtly shaping the world Harry inhabited. It's easy to dismiss rumors when they're distant, but when they inch closer to home, when they touch the edges of your private life, they start to feel like truths. And Harry, despite his experience, was not immune. Think about it. How often do we accept information simply because it appears consistent? Once multiple sources begin to hint at a story, even if the details are murky, our brains start connecting the dots, filling in gaps with assumptions. That's exactly what happened to Harry. The media didn't just report, they framed. They selected which stories to emphasize, which images to circulate, which narratives to elevate. Slowly, inexorably, they began to build a version of reality that even Harry had to confront. And the complexity didn't stop there. The media is not a monolith. Competing outlets, rival publications, influencers, and commentators all contribute to a swirling vortex of interpretation, opinion, and conjecture. One story contradicts another, yet the contradictions themselves add to the intrigue. For Harry, this meant that every day brought a new puzzle. Which reports were credible, which were exaggerated, and which were designed purely to manipulate perception? It's a dizzying experience, and for someone living at the epicenter of global attention, there is no escape. Harry quickly realized that influence operates on multiple levels. Public perception is one layer, but personal relationships are another entirely. Friends, advisors, even distant family members began to weigh in, some out of genuine concern, others out of fear of being implicated in a narrative spiraling out of control. Every conversation, every phone call, every meeting became charged with additional meaning. Was someone being honest with him, or were they echoing what they had read or heard? Was advice truly advice, or was it shaped by fear, rumor, or self-interest? And then there's the emotional component. Influence isn't only cognitive, it's deeply psychological. The more Harry absorbed, the more he questioned himself. Had he been naive? Had he misjudged situations? Were the signals he had ignored early on actually warnings he should have heeded? Doubt crept in, subtle at first, then persistent, gnawing at the edges of his confidence. When the world constantly whispers that your decisions are flawed, even the strongest resolve begins to waver. It didn't take long for Harry to see the patterns emerging. Certain publications had favored narratives, consistently framing Meghan in particular lights, sometimes sympathetic, sometimes critical, but always compelling. Photos were curated, edited, and presented strategically to reinforce these stories. Interviews were timed, carefully managed, and selectively released. Every detail was calculated, every angle considered. And all of it was designed to influence perception, both publicly and privately. Harry realized something chilling. He wasn't just being observed, he was being guided. His reactions, decisions, and even his emotions were now part of a broader narrative controlled by forces outside his immediate control. And the realization came with a sense of betrayal, not just from those creating the stories, but from the system itself. He had been raised to trust his instincts, to act decisively. Yet here was an invisible hand shaping the world around him, subtly dictating his understanding of reality. And yet, despite all of this, Harry was determined to act. He couldn't allow the story to unfold without scrutiny, without context, without the ability to make his own judgments. But the more he tried to separate truth from manipulation, the more he realized how complicated it had become. The web of influence wasn't just external. It had permeated his own thinking, challenging his confidence, clouding his perception, and forcing him to confront uncomfortable possibilities. One night, after hours of reflection and research, Harry sat in his study, scrolling through news archives, interviews, and social media posts. Each click, each article, each video added another thread to the web. He saw patterns he hadn't noticed before. Connections between stories, subtle framing choices, recurring narratives. And slowly, the realization dawned. This wasn't just random gossip. It was a meticulously constructed narrative, one that had been developing long before he had ever met Meghan. It became painfully clear that understanding Meghan's story required understanding the forces shaping her story as well. Her past, her career, her choices. Every element had been interpreted, reinterpreted, and often distorted by external pressures. And for Harry, reconciling the person he loved with the version of her presented to the world was increasingly difficult. The lines between perception and reality blurred. What was authentic? What was amplified? And how much of it was meant to manipulate not just public opinion, but his own sense of judgment? And just when he thought he had a grasp on the complexity, new information arrived. A series of contacts, documents, and messages that suggested the influence extended even further than he imagined. Allies, enemies, media figures, and unknown intermediaries were all involved, each with their own motives, each adding layers to a narrative that seemed impossible to untangle. Harry realized that the web was not just surrounding him. It was pulling him in, threatening to engulf everything he thought he knew about trust, love, and loyalty. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, Harry found a strange clarity. He understood that to protect the life he had built and the woman he loved, he would have to navigate this web carefully, strategically, and with unflinching determination. There was no room for naivety, no space for assumptions. Every decision mattered, every word had weight, every action would be scrutinized, and failure was not an option. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. Just as Harry began to piece together the threads of influence, a single message arrived, cryptic, urgent, and utterly unexpected. It promised to reveal connections he had never suspected, truths he had never imagined, and a layer of complexity that would push him further into a reality he was barely prepared to face. And in that instant, Harry knew one undeniable truth. Nothing in his life, no matter how carefully controlled, would ever be the same again. But what came next would force him to confront a past he hadn't fully seen, a present fraught with tension, and a future that was terrifyingly uncertain. And the consequences of what he would learn next would ripple far beyond his personal life, reaching into the very heart of the institution he was born into. There are moments in life that change everything, not because of what happens in public, but because of what happens behind closed doors. For Harry, one of the most pivotal realizations came not from headlines, not from whispers in the media, but from private conversations that suddenly took on a weight he could no longer dismiss. These were discussions that peeled back layers, revealing complexities in Meghan's past, the pressures she faced, and the delicate balancing act of love, trust, and loyalty. It began with an evening phone call from a trusted confidant, someone Harry had relied on for years. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, but the content of the conversation was anything but. "Harry," the confidant began, "there are things you need to know. Things about Meghan, about her past, that could change how you see everything." The words hit Harry like a shockwave. He had faced scrutiny before, he had weathered storms, but nothing like this. He felt a combination of curiosity, fear, and an almost paralyzing sense of urgency. Imagine hearing something about someone you love that shakes the foundation of what you thought you knew. It's not just about doubt. It's about the emotional weight of realizing that your understanding of someone may have been incomplete. And Harry, despite his experience and resilience, felt this weight pressing down on him. He wanted to protect Meghan, to defend her against the world, but he also knew that understanding these truths was essential if he wanted to protect their shared future. The conversation continued, each sentence more revealing than the last. The confidant spoke carefully, deliberately, painting a picture that was both complicated and, in some ways, deeply human. Harry listened intently, piecing together fragments of information, trying to separate fact from speculation, truth from interpretation. The process was exhausting, emotionally draining, but he knew he couldn't turn away. This wasn't just about curiosity. It was about clarity, about understanding the full scope of the woman he loved. What made it particularly difficult was the emotional dimension. Harry had fallen in love with Meghan not for her past, but for who she was in the present, the person she showed him, the bond they had built together. Yet, the past has a way of intruding on the present, especially when it is illuminated by private conversations that reveal unexpected complexity. Every revelation forced him to confront not only Meghan's history but his own assumptions, his own understanding of loyalty, and the depth of his love. There were moments when Harry wanted to stop the conversation, to put the phone down and retreat to the comfort of ignorance. But the more he tried to step back, the more he realized he couldn't. Understanding the truth, even when it's difficult, is part of protecting the people you love. And so, he pressed on, listening to stories that range from the mundane to the deeply personal, each one shaping a fuller picture of Meghan's life before he met her. Some of the details were surprising, others were poignant, and a few were downright shocking. Harry found himself questioning what he had assumed, what he had overlooked, and what he had been shielded from. But he also realized that every individual has chapters of their life that are private, chapters that may never be fully understood by others. Meghan's story, as he began to see it, was layered with experiences, choices, and challenges that had shaped her into the person he loved. The emotional stakes were immense. Harry felt a mixture of empathy, confusion, and determination. Empathy, because he began to understand the pressures Meghan had faced long before their relationship. Confusion, because some of the revelations challenged what he thought he knew. And determination, because he realized that love isn't just about accepting someone's present. It's about navigating the complexities of their past while building a shared future. And yet, the private conversations didn't just illuminate Meghan's past. They also revealed the intricate dynamics of the media, the public, and even the royal family. Harry began to see how narratives were shaped, how perceptions were manipulated, and how the story of Meghan's life was not entirely her own. This realization was both empowering and frightening. Empowering, because understanding the forces at play gave him insight. Frightening, because he saw how easily misinformation and misinterpretation could spread, impacting not just Meghan's reputation but their entire lives. As the nights wore on, Harry engaged in multiple private discussions with advisors, friends, and confidants. Each conversation added layers to the narrative, each piece of information a thread in a complex web of personal, social, and institutional dynamics. He began to understand that navigating these revelations required not just emotional strength, but strategic thinking. Every word, every decision, every action could have consequences far beyond their immediate context. And then came the moment that changed everything. A private meeting, arranged under the guise of discretion, revealed a layer of Meghan's past that Harry had never encountered. The information was not malicious, not designed to harm, but it carried implications that could not be ignored. Harry felt a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a profound need to understand fully before taking any action. He knew that how he responded would define not only his relationship, but also his own sense of integrity, loyalty, and love. What made the revelation so impactful was not just the content, but the timing. Harry had been navigating months of speculation, media scrutiny, and personal reflection. He was prepared, in theory, to confront challenges, but nothing could have fully prepared him for this. The private conversation exposed not just hidden details, but also the emotional stakes of trust, the fragility of perception, and the complexity of navigating love under public scrutiny. As he left the meeting, Harry felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. Relief, because he had clarity on elements of Meghan's past. Trepidation, because clarity often brings responsibility. The responsibility to act, to respond, to protect, and sometimes to confront difficult truths. And in that moment, he realized that the next steps would require not just courage, but precision. Every decision mattered. Every word mattered. Every action mattered. And just when he thought he had reached some measure of understanding, a new development emerged. An unexpected message, an unforeseen contact, a startling revelation that would push him further into a world of complexity he had only begun to grasp. The private conversations had illuminated much, but they had also opened doors that led to questions no one could answer yet. And so, Harry faced a decision: step forward into uncertainty, armed with partial truths and a fragile sense of clarity, or retreat into the comfort of ignorance, knowing that doing so would not protect the life he loved. He chose to step forward, unaware that the path ahead would test every ounce of his resilience, every thread of trust, and every element of the bond he shared with Meghan. Because what came next would push Harry to the edge and force him to confront realities about love, loyalty, and the consequences of revelation that he could not have imagined. The glare of the cameras was relentless. Every appearance, every smile, every gesture was scrutinized, dissected, and interpreted by millions. For Harry, it had always been part of life, part of the burden of royalty. But what he began to realize was that the public scrutiny he had experienced in the past was nothing compared to what was happening now. This wasn't just about him. It was about Meghan, about their relationship, and about the delicate web of perception that could make or break them in an instant. It started subtly. Articles appeared in the tabloids. Innuendos, half-truths, and sensationalized claims that hinted at complexities in Meghan's past. On social media, commentary ranged from admiration to suspicion, from support to outrage. And while Harry was no stranger to criticism, this wave carried an intensity that felt personal, targeted, and almost impossible to escape. The public's perception, he realized, had the power to shape the narrative, sometimes in ways that reality couldn't counter. Think about it. When millions of people form opinions based on fragmented information, the line between fact and fiction becomes blurry. Headlines become reality, tweets become proof, and assumptions become accepted truths. For Harry, this meant that even as he sought to understand the complexities of Meghan's past, he was simultaneously battling a world that was forming judgments without context, without nuance, and often without mercy. The pressure was magnified by the sheer speed of information. News cycles had accelerated to an unimaginable pace. One story would dominate the headlines in the morning, only to be replaced by another by nightfall. Each new development added layers of complication, forcing Harry to respond, or at least manage the fallout, in real time. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and relentless. And yet, there was no option to retreat. The cameras, the reporters, and the public were everywhere, watching, waiting, judging. Harry began to notice the toll it was taking on Meghan as well. She carried herself with grace, poise, and strength in public, but the strain was visible in private moments. Late-night phone calls, long walks in solitude, and fleeting moments of vulnerability revealed the human cost of living under this microscope. Harry felt a mixture of admiration and worry. He admired her resilience, her courage, and her ability to navigate a world that was often hostile. But he also worried about the emotional weight she carried, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the constant tension between public performance and private reality. And yet, despite the intensity, Harry was determined to protect her. He had faced media storms before, endured relentless scrutiny, and emerged stronger. But this felt different. This was personal, deeply intertwined with love, trust, and the complexities of the woman he had chosen to marry. He realized that protecting Meghan meant more than public statements or media strategies. It meant understanding the narrative, anticipating challenges, and preparing for consequences that could ripple far beyond their immediate circle. The tipping point came during a high-profile event in London. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and social media buzzed with speculation. Every glance, every word, every gesture was analyzed, dissected, and interpreted. Harry felt the familiar tension rising. The pressure of performance, the weight of expectation, and the relentless scrutiny of a world that seemed hungry for drama. And in that moment, he realized that the public's perception had become almost as important as the truth itself. It was during this event that a particularly sharp headline caught his attention. A subtle insinuation, a carefully crafted narrative, and suddenly, the story of Meghan's past was not just being questioned, it was being reframed, manipulated, and amplified. Harry felt a rush of anger, confusion, and determination. He knew that if they didn't respond strategically, the narrative could spiral out of control, affecting not just their personal lives but the broader perception of their relationship and even the monarchy itself. Harry began to strategize, to plan, and to anticipate. He understood that in the public eye, perception often outweighs reality. He also understood that controlling the narrative required precision, patience, and an unyielding commitment to truth. Every public appearance, every statement, every interaction needed to be considered carefully, not just for its immediate impact, but for the long-term implications on reputation, trust, and public understanding. And yet, no matter how carefully he planned, the pressure persisted. The public's curiosity was insatiable, the media's scrutiny unrelenting, and the social discourse unceasing. Every minor slip, every misunderstood gesture, and every rumor carried the potential to escalate, to amplify, and to distort. Harry realized that living in the spotlight was not just a matter of public performance. It was a constant negotiation between reality, perception, and influence. It wasn't just the external pressure that weighed on him. Internally, Harry wrestled with questions of trust, loyalty, and responsibility. How much of Meghan's past should he know before making decisions? How could he protect her from public scrutiny without controlling or censoring her narrative? And how could he reconcile the complexities of love with the often brutal realities of life in the public eye? These were questions with no easy answers, questions that demanded resilience, insight, and emotional fortitude. And then, as if the universe were testing his limits further, a new development emerged, an unexpected leak, a private document, a revelation that promised to shift the entire narrative yet again. The leak was subtle, almost inconspicuous, but Harry immediately recognized its significance. It was a reminder that in a world dominated by influence, perception, and relentless curiosity, no secret remains hidden forever. And for Harry, this was the beginning of a journey that would push him to his emotional and strategic limits, forcing him to confront truths, navigate consequences, and protect the life he loved more than anything. And just when he thought he had managed the pressure, when he believed he could contain the narrative and shield Meghan, a new twist arrived, one that no strategy, no preparation, and no experience could have anticipated. The public spotlight had shifted, and with it, the stakes had grown exponentially. Because what came next would force Harry to confront not just media influence, but the very foundations of trust, loyalty, and love. And it would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about the world, the woman he loved, and the life they were building together. In the midst of chaos, one of the most important things Harry realized was the value of his inner circle. Friends, advisors, confidants. These were the people who could help him navigate the storm. But even among allies, nothing was ever straightforward. Loyalty was tested, intentions were questioned, and hidden agendas sometimes lurked beneath smiles and reassurances. Harry quickly learned that understanding the dynamics of his inner circle was just as critical as understanding the pressures of public scrutiny. It began with a meeting in the privacy of a secluded office. Harry sat across from a trusted advisor, someone he had relied on for years. The conversation was meant to provide guidance, but it quickly revealed how complex the situation had become. "Harry," the advisor began, "not everyone who appears loyal truly is, and some who seem distant may actually be the ones trying to protect you." The words struck Harry hard. In a world dominated by perception and secrecy, understanding the motivations of those around him was more crucial than ever. The inner circle wasn't just about strategy, it was about survival. Every person had influence, whether subtle or overt. Advisors controlled access to information, friends mediated communications, and distant relatives whispered opinions that could either guide or mislead. Harry realized that the balance of loyalty and influence was fragile, constantly shifting, and impossible to ignore. A single misstep could have far-reaching consequences, not only for him and Meghan, but for the entire family dynamic. And then there were the hidden agendas. Some allies genuinely wanted to help, to provide insight, and to offer protection. Others had motives shaped by personal gain, reputation, or fear of being implicated in unfolding controversies. Harry had to learn quickly which voices to trust, which guidance to follow, and which advice to scrutinize carefully. It was a delicate dance of intuition, experience, and caution, a challenge that demanded both emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. At the same time, Harry realized that Meghan's own network of friends and advisors was equally influential. These individuals, fiercely protective of her, often had their own interpretations of events, sometimes clashing with Harry's perspective. Navigating the intersection of two overlapping networks, each with their own priorities and loyalties, was exhausting. Harry had to act as both mediator and protector, balancing competing narratives while ensuring that neither Meghan nor the truth was compromised. Consider for a moment the emotional strain this created. Harry had to reconcile conflicting advice, evaluate motives, and anticipate consequences, all while maintaining his own composure and making decisions in real time. Every conversation carried weight, every gesture had meaning, and every word spoken in confidence could either strengthen or undermine his position. It was a high-stakes game of strategy, trust, and intuition, and the margin for error was almost non-existent. The pressure intensified when Harry began to notice subtle tensions within the inner circle. Trusted advisors who had once been allies now questioned his decisions. Friends who had offered support began to voice doubts. And even distant family members weighed in with commentary that blurred the lines between concern and manipulation. Harry realized that in this world, nothing was purely personal or purely professional. Everything was intertwined, and the consequences of misjudgment could be catastrophic. It wasn't just the advisors and friends who posed challenges. Meghan herself had her own team, fiercely protective and sometimes in conflict with Harry's circle. While their goals often aligned, to protect her, to maintain dignity, to manage public perception, their methods sometimes clashed. Negotiating these dynamics required patience, diplomacy, and a clear understanding of priorities. Harry had to find a balance between loyalty to Meghan, respect for her autonomy, and the strategic needs of their shared public life. And then came the unexpected twist. Whispers of internal conflicts reaching outside the inner circle. Harry began hearing rumors, subtle at first, about disagreements that extended beyond their immediate network. Some were minor, inconsequential disagreements. Others, however, hinted at deeper tensions, at power plays, at alliances being tested in ways Harry had not anticipated. The realization that even the people closest to them could be influenced by external pressures was both alarming and sobering. In one particularly revealing meeting, an advisor leaned in and whispered, "Harry, you need to understand. Some people are watching you as closely as the world is watching Meghan. They're not just observers, they're players in this game, and their moves could change everything." The words sent a chill down Harry's spine. He understood then that the inner circle was not just a source of support. It was a complex ecosystem of influence, loyalty, and ambition, where every action had consequences far beyond what met the eye. Harry's strategy became clear. He had to cultivate discernment. He needed to differentiate between genuine advice and veiled manipulation, between loyalty and self-interest. He had to build bridges while maintaining boundaries, to navigate emotional terrain while making strategic decisions. And perhaps most importantly, he had to prepare for the moment when the inner circle itself would become the source of unexpected revelations, truths that could either protect or imperil everything he held dear. The emotional stakes were immense. Harry understood that decisions made within this network of allies and advisors would affect his relationship with Meghan, the perception of the public, and even the stability of family dynamics. Every conversation, every decision, every alignment of trust carried the potential to alter the course of his life in profound ways. And the pressure was relentless. There was no room for error, no luxury of hesitation, and no certainty that any choice would yield the outcome he desired. And then, just when he thought he had a handle on the dynamics of the inner circle, a shocking revelation arrived from an unexpected source. A message, a meeting, or a leak that exposed hidden tensions, undisclosed motives, and the potential for betrayal in ways Harry had not anticipated. It was a reminder that even those closest to you are not always what they seem, and that navigating the web of loyalty, influence, and trust requires vigilance, courage, and clarity of purpose. And in that moment, Harry realized one undeniable truth. In a world dominated by scrutiny, revelation, and complex human dynamics, even love itself must be navigated with strategy, awareness, and unwavering commitment. But what came next would reveal a hidden layer of influence, a secret he hadn't yet anticipated, and a challenge that would test every ounce of his resolve, reshaping the path forward in ways he could never have imagined. Harry had always known that the past can shape the present, but he had believed that love and trust could bridge any gaps. Yet, as the layers of Meghan's history slowly came into view, he realized that some pieces of the past were impossible to ignore. What had once seemed trivial, even irrelevant, now demanded attention. Every fragment of information, every anecdote, every whisper from friends and sources started to fit into a pattern that was both shocking and, in some ways, inevitable. It began with a conversation that Harry hadn't anticipated. A distant acquaintance, someone who had known Meghan before she met him, reached out with a mixture of hesitation and urgency. "Harry," the person began, "there are things about Meghan's early life, her career, that you need to know, things that she hasn't shared." The word struck like a lightning bolt. Harry paused, unsure if he was prepared for the truths that might emerge. And yet, he knew he had no choice. If he wanted clarity, if he wanted to fully understand the woman he loved, he had to listen. What followed was a painstaking unraveling of details that Harry had never considered. Stories, records, and accounts from the past were shared cautiously, pieced together in a way that painted a picture of a life far more complex than the one publicly presented. Each revelation carried emotional weight, forcing Harry to reconcile the woman he loved in the present with the choices, circumstances, and challenges she had faced before. It was a delicate process, navigating empathy, understanding, and the shock of the unknown. Some of the details were mundane, easily contextualized. Others were jarring, unexpected, and difficult to process. Harry found himself wrestling with conflicting emotions. Compassion for the struggles Meghan had endured, disbelief at the hidden complexities, and a gnawing sense of urgency to understand fully before assumptions or misunderstandings took root. How could he reconcile love with revelation when the revelations were so profound? The more Harry learned, the more he realized that Meghan's past had been carefully curated, not deceitfully, but strategically. Certain elements were highlighted, others minimized, and some remained entirely private. It became clear that her public persona was a reflection of her present choices and her desire to manage perception. But the private history contained layers that were essential to understanding her fully. And for Harry, ignoring these layers was no longer an option. Every piece of information added depth to the puzzle, revealing motivations, pressures, and moments that had shaped Meghan into the person she had become. Harry began to see connections between past experiences and present behaviors, patterns that illuminated decisions, reactions, and the ways she navigated public and private life. It was a process of discovery that was as enlightening as it was challenging, forcing Harry to confront questions he had never asked and truths he had never considered. And yet, the revelation of the hidden past was not just about Meghan. It was about Harry as well. Understanding her history required introspection, reflection, and an evaluation of his own expectations, assumptions, and capacity for empathy. He had to consider not only the factual elements of her past, but also the emotional context, the pressures she faced, and the strategies she employed to navigate a world that could be both unforgiving and opportunistic. Harry began to piece together a timeline, correlating events, career milestones, personal experiences, and public appearances. Patterns emerged, revealing both resilience and complexity. He noticed moments of vulnerability, decisions made under pressure, and choices that reflected a combination of ambition, necessity, and self-preservation. And with each insight, he gained a clearer understanding of the forces that had shaped Meghan's life long before he met her. But there was a darker layer, one that had previously remained hidden. Certain revelations hinted at experiences that were not widely discussed. Events, encounters, and choices that carried social and emotional weight. Harry realized that these elements, while deeply personal, had the potential to influence public perception dramatically. The stakes were immense, not just for Meghan's reputation, but for their relationship and for the delicate balance of trust between them. In the midst of processing these truths, Harry began to reflect on his own journey. How much did he truly know about the person he loved? How much of what he assumed was accurate, and how much was shaped by selective narratives and public portrayal? The process was humbling, forcing him to confront the limits of his knowledge, the depth of his empathy, and the resilience of his love. The revelations were also accompanied by practical challenges. Managing the narrative, anticipating media reactions, and preparing for potential scrutiny became essential. Harry understood that even private truths, once revealed, could ripple outward, creating consequences that were impossible to contain. He had to think strategically, balancing emotional clarity with pragmatic decision-making. And just when he thought he had reached a measure of understanding, a new piece of information surfaced, an unexpected contact, a confidential message, a subtle hint that revealed a layer of Meghan's past that Harry had not yet considered. It was a reminder that the journey of discovery was ongoing, that understanding someone fully is rarely instantaneous, and that every answer can lead to more questions. This new revelation was particularly shocking because it linked past experiences to present circumstances in ways Harry had not anticipated. It suggested motivations, pressures, and choices that cast previous events in a new light. The clarity it provided was intertwined with new uncertainties, forcing Harry to navigate not just what he now knew, but also what he had yet to uncover. And in that moment, Harry realized something profound. Understanding Meghan's past was not about judgment. It was about comprehension, empathy, and preparation. It was about being equipped to face the full spectrum of challenges, to protect the bond they shared, and to anticipate the consequences of both revelation and perception. But what came next would push Harry to confront the public, the private, and the personal all at once. It would force him to navigate truths that were simultaneously intimate and explosive, and it would challenge every assumption he had about love, loyalty, and the weight of hidden histories. Because the next revelation wasn't just about Meghan. It was about everything Harry thought he knew, and it would change the course of his journey in ways no one could have predicted.